All right, let's jump right in. Now, what we're about to walk through isn't some new theory or a wild hypothesis. It's not an argument either. The source material is super clear about this. This is a demonstration. We're basically just going to point to a structure that's already here, already operating in our world. It's kind of like a reclassification of how we think about, well, thinking itself. So, let's kick things off with a pre-provocative question. What if the words we use to talk about our own minds are, well, broken? Seriously. Think about huge words like consciousness or reality. What if they're actually getting in our way? You know, these giant bucket terms that we just throw everything into? Maybe they're so jumbled up that they actually stop us from seeing what's really going on.
And you know what? We can actually watch this happen in history. Take a look at the word consciousness. It starts way back with the Latin consciere, which literally means to know with. It was all about mutual, shared awareness. But then, watch what happens. By the 1600s, it starts turning inward. And by the time we get to John Locke, boom, it's defined as what happens inside a single person's mind. So in just a few centuries, we took this big, shared idea and locked it up inside a private little box in our skulls.
Okay, so how do we fix this? Well, the source material calls it a grammatical repair. Instead of using that one messy, overstuffed bucket term, we're going to unpack it. We're going to separate it into three fundamental core ideas, three primitives. And we're not inventing anything new here, we're just cleaning up the language to reveal the different jobs that one word was trying to do all by itself. First up is awareness. Now, the source material uses some technical language here, calling it the non-commutative formative ground. But don't worry about that. All it really means is it's the fundamental potential, the absolute precondition for anything to happen. The key thing to get, and this is huge, is that awareness is not in your brain. It's not something you possess. Think of it like a movie screen. The screen itself isn't in the movie, but without it, no movie could ever be shown. That's awareness. It's just there, the ground for everything.
Okay, number 2 is address. So if awareness is that infinite silent screen, what's address? It's the projector's beam. It's the act of focusing, the orientation that selects one little piece of that infinite potential and lights it up. It's the operator, the thing that decides what actually gets to become visible. It's the mechanism of selection, pure and simple.
And that brings us to number 3, occurrence. This one's easy. It's what actually shows up on the screen. It's the image, the movie. It's the result of address lighting up a piece of awareness. It's what happens when a potential gets stabilized and becomes an observable thing. A thought you have, the cup of coffee on your desk, me talking right now, all of it. Every single thing that appears, that's an occurrence.
And right away, you can see how powerful this is. This new grammar totally changes the kinds of questions we can even ask. For example, we love to ask, is this AI conscious? But with our new toolkit, we see it's an incoherent question. It uses the broken bucket term. But what if we ask this instead? From what depth of address is this system operating? See the difference? That's a question we can actually dig into, a question we can investigate. It shows the first question wasn't just hard, it was badly formed from the start.
Now, I know this might all sound a little bit out there, a bit abstract, but check out this quote from Werner Erhard that gives you a much more direct, experiential feel for this structure. He says, "I am the clearing in which it all shows up, and one occurrence in the clearing is the body I refer to as I." And the document is really clear about this. This isn't a statement you're supposed to believe, but an address you can hold to see what occurs for you. All right, so we've got the basic grammar down. Awareness, address, occurrence. Now for the fun part. Let's actually go out into the field and see it in action. We're going to look at a few totally different areas and see this exact same three-part structure, this invariant pattern, pop up again and again. Honestly, this is the core of the whole demonstration. First up, let's look at something we've all seen, or even been a part of, that incredible, almost magical connection between a baby and a caregiver. That deep coordination that happens way, way before anyone says a single word. And this maps perfectly onto our grammar. So what's the awareness? It's that shared space, that common ground that the baby and caregiver are both in. The address? Well, it's not words, it's the rhythmic rocking, the gaze, the way their bodies sync up. It can even be things like maternal chemosignals. Yeah, subtle chemical cues that studies show can literally sync up an infant's brainwaves. And the occurrence? What's the result of all that? It's the stuff we can actually see. Bonding, attachment, and get this, the literal, physical maturation of the infant's brain.
Now let's scale that way up to something like a high-performing team. What we call group flow or collective intelligence is described in this grammar as the emergence of a shared address. Things like making sure everyone gets a turn to speak and having high social sensitivity, those aren't just good manners. They are the actual practical mechanisms that align the team's focus into a single coherent system.
And this is the really mind-bending part of the demonstration. The connection between that infant caregiver pair and the high-performing team, it is not an analogy. It is the exact same structural process of phase alignment. The only difference is the scale and the density of the address. Okay, for our next example, let's talk about language. But we need to look at it in a totally new way. Language isn't just a tool for describing the world out there. The source material calls it a form of densified address. What does that mean? It means the language you speak actually shapes and constrains what you're able to see in the first place.
And this example just nails it. So in English, we'd probably say, John broke the vase. Our grammar focuses on the agent, on who did it. And guess what? Studies show English speakers are better at remembering who was to blame. Now in Spanish, it's more common to say, the vase broke. It's more event-focused. And Spanish speakers, they're better at remembering that it was an accident. How cool is that? The same event, but a different linguistic address creates a totally different occurrence in memory.
All right, our third demonstration takes us into the lab, into social neuroscience. This is wild. Using tech called hyperscanning, scientists can now watch two people's brains at the same time while they interact. And what they're finding is that their brains literally sync up. Their brain waves, their neural oscillations actually phase lock with each other.
So what is this interbrain synchrony? Well, it's the physical, measurable evidence of our grammar in action. Think about it. Two people are deep in conversation. They're making eye contact. They're listening intently. That's their shared address. And what does that do? It causes their brainwaves to literally couple up. The occurrence, the thing that shows up, is what we all recognize as great communication, rapport, a real connection. Their brains aren't just two separate things sending signals back and forth. For a moment, they become one coupled system.
So let's just pause for a second. We've seen it with a baby and its mother, we've seen it in the grammar of our language, and we've seen it in brainwaves measured in a lab. It's the same pattern, over and over. So now, let's just lay out this invariant structure that seems to operate at every single scale.
The source material even has a formal notation for this, but let's not get bogged down in the math. The idea behind it is actually really simple and intuitive. It's basically the ratio of the formative impulse, the drive to express or emerge, to the containing capacity, which is the system's ability to hold and integrate that impulse. When T is around 1, you get a coherent system. When it's way off, the system either fragments and falls apart or it just freezes up. The best analogy is a river. The water flowing is the formative pressure. The river banks are the containing tension. When they're in balance, you have a beautiful, coherent river. If they're out of balance, you either get a flood or a dried-up ditch. For any system to be stable, whether it's a conversation, a company, or an entire ecosystem, it needs a balance.
So what this all points to is a kind of scaling law for coherence. It has to be built from the ground up. You get a stable, coherent system at one level, and that becomes the necessary foundation, the substrate, for coherence to emerge at the next level up. You just can't have a coherent team without coherent pairs, and you can't get coherent pairs without coherent individuals.
Okay, so let's put all the pieces together. These are the invariants, the principles that don't seem to change. 1, awareness is the unpartitioned ground, the field of all potential. 2, address is the operator that focuses and constrains that potential. 3, occurrence is what shows up. It's the closure of that system. 4, synchrony is the physical signature, the mechanism we can actually measure, like those brainwaves locking up. And 5, and this one is so important, coherence is nested. You have to get closure at one scale, say between two people, to enable closure at the next scale up, like creating a successful team.
So we've seen the grammatical repair, and we've seen it in action. All right, let's pull the camera all the way back now and look at the pretty profound implications this shift could have for how we see, well, everything.
Here it is, the document's formal reclassification. What we used to call distributed cognition is grammatically reframed as a single field resolving itself across a bunch of different address nodes. So it stops being about separate minds trying to send signals back and forth and becomes about one single field finding its own coherence.
You see, with our old, broken grammar, we were stuck with this impossible question. How does separate, isolated minds somehow bridge this giant gap to connect with each other?
This new grammar just completely flips the puzzle on its head. The question isn't about connection anymore. It's about separation. It becomes,
If we're all just nodes in one continuous field, what produces the incredibly powerful appearance of being separate? And the grammatical answer is stunningly simple: the density of our own local address. Our intense, moment-to-moment focus on our own body, our own senses, and our own thoughts creates the persistent feeling of a boundary where one might not actually exist.
And that really brings us to the most important point. This whole framework, it's not a new religion. It's not something you're supposed to believe in. It's a tool. It's a lens. The source material describes it as an address to hold, a specific way to orient your own attention. And the invitation really is a challenge. Just try it. Hold this address, look at the world through this lens, and just see for yourself what occurs.